Please pay attention to what I've said tonight. You may not agree with everything, but if you'll study the things that I've studied and look at what's going on in Europe, you'll understand very clearly that what I've said has merit and we need to do it. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Okay. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you. It's an important topic these days when we refer to jobs. Jobs in America, jobs that we retain, jobs that we create. The overwhelming issue right now in the minds and hearts of constituents across this country, I firmly believe, is about the dignity of work. Jobs that need to be strengthened out there in number so as to provide for the opportunity for people to dream the American dream. American dream of home ownership, of education for their children, higher education pursuits, so as to unleash the skills and the talents and the passions of next generations of workers, training, retraining programs to enable the human infrastructure required as an investment in the work zone of America is an important aspect of the investment that we need to make through policy reforms and policy strengthening and resource advocacy that we can do here in the halls of Congress, on the floor of the House of Representatives, to enable us to fill those coffers with the quality investments that need to be made from a human infrastructure perspective to a capital infrastructure and certainly to a physical infrastructure as we go forward and allow this country to utilize its intellectual capacity, to use the brain power of these United States to enable us to compete and compete effectively in a way that acknowledges that the job market, the jobs created, the jobs retained through advocacy here in Washington can speak to the ultimate highest priority that people have established for all of us who are serving, regardless of political persuasion or philosophical mindset. As we serve this nation, we can best provide for an outcome of jobs that are created in our society. There's no stronger need. There should be no stronger commitment. The President showcased that when he was hosted here in the House of Representatives with a joint session of Congress. And the room was filled, the gallery was packed as people witnessed a very passionate speech from the leader of the free world, as President Obama laid forth his vision, his plan, his initiatives, his goals for the American people. The House of Representatives and members of the United States Senate got to hear firsthand what that effort is all about. And so people listened with intent to move forward with that blueprint for our future, a blueprint that would strengthen our economy and have an impact across the world. We have this opportunity now to work in a multipartisan way, in a bicameral response to what the President has highlighted to be his plan for jobs here in America. And I was happy to note that amongst his arguments, amongst his priorities, happens to be the creation of an innovation economy, a response perhaps to an innovation economy that finds us as an ideas society investing in those ideas. Investing in ideas that get moved along perhaps to a prototype that moves along to a manufacturing sector. Before entering the halls of Congress, before being elected to the House of Representatives, served as President and CEO at NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. It is nationally recognized for its cutting-edge work being done in the science and tech aspects of high tech. We, by the way, in the district that I represent, the 21st Congressional District in New York State, much about the Capital Region and Mohawk Valley and Schoharie Valley of upstate New York have been dubbed recently by Brookings Institute to be the hottest territory, the strongest hub, the most active region in the country for green-collar job growth. That's a feather in our cap, and if someone wants to see investment happening, it's there in the capital region of New York. It took a partnership with academia and state government and federal government, yes, but it also was a partnership with the private sector, where great investments were made by the private sector in this high-tech agenda, in this science and tech agenda, nanoscience, semiconductor, advanced battery manufacturing, and now that is somewhat clustering in its concept to draw more and more startups and entrepreneurial efforts and workers who are clustering in this way, academia getting invested in the research aspects. I mention that because the innovation economy is something that received high focus and inordinate amount of attention in the speech made by the President. He understands, and he has professed, and I agree with his assessment, that whoever wins this global race on innovation will emerge the exporter, the kingpin, if you will, of the global economy, the exporter of energy, intellect, and innovation and ideas that will enable us to, in a way, mimic the success stories of the space race, a global race that found fewer partners, but found the United States of America being victorious. And that all began, I believe, with a setback. Sometimes failure is a misunderstood gift. In this case, through the Sputnik moment, America, in its defeat, had to stand up and dust off its backside and commit with passion, as experienced with the words of John F. Kennedy, who said, we're going to do this effort of investing in the space race, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And that attitude, that tone, that passion, that commitment, that resolve produced a winning moment when we were the first to achieve the daunting task of landing a person first on the moon. As a nation, we took great pride in that event that happened some 40-plus years ago. And it was more than the magic moment of landing a person on the moon and the infamous quote that talked about man's small step and the giant leap for mankind. It was the unleashing of technology and untold aspects of our world, of our society, where technology reached communications and energy generation and education and healthcare, to name a few segments of activity out there. That was a profound statement made by America and her brain power, America and her will to invest in her people and in a mission that brought us together as a nation, where everyone joined in the efforts to fine-tune the best way by which to pursue that mission. What happened really raised America. Her leadership potential, her leadership recognition in the global community became profoundly enhanced. And it was not just technology entering these different segments of our society, but bolstering all these aspects, the different sectors of our economy. And of course, impacting, not just for Americans, but people worldwide, the quality of life that we enjoy, the opportunity to strengthen services, to be able to bring us together in almost a village capacity as a world, simply because of technology. Well, today I would remind my colleagues in the House of Representatives and our partners down the hall in the United States Senate that we have that same moment, that same challenge, that same need to resolve with passion again, to go forward with a mission that allows us to invest in a clean energy society, in a clean energy economy, into an innovation agenda. Think of it. We have so many opportunities here. We have committed so many times over to public and private aspects of research and development, of investment, of research that leads to ideas, or ideas that are built by that research to a greater capacity, and then shared in a way that builds and develops the prototype that then creates the manufacturing aspect. We've seen it with the chips manufacturing in my district. Perhaps the largest such construction of a chips manufacturing facility in all of America is taking hold in the region, in the area that I call home. That is enabling us to think beyond usual terms. We're thinking of chips applied to agriculture, chips applied to healthcare, chips applied to the education world. That is a marvel in and of itself, and it's enabling the best minds to cluster in an area like that which I represent in the 21st Congressional District in upstate New York and the Capital Region. That's the investment that I believe America not only requires, but that Americans are demanding of their leaders, leaders that occupy these seats here in Washington in the halls of Congress. That's what they're asking for, that sort of investment, that sort of magical quality that we have seen throughout our history. It's replete with sagas of success that began oftentimes with hyphenated Americans in their first generation of connection to these soils, investing in a way with this brightness of ideas coming from blue-collar workers who enabled us to take a region like that which I represent and allow it to inspire a westward movement and an industrial revolution. Because in the heartlands of the 21st Congressional District, we were the hosts to an Erie Canal, barge canal history. And what that pathway, that waterway pronounced with its own presence is the opportunity to build a port of New York that then gave birth to a necklace of communities dubbed mill towns that became these epicenters of invention and innovation. It was perhaps the first high-tech revolution taking hold in the 21st Congressional District of New York. And it was there that all sorts of product lines were conceived and then further developed and then realized in the marketplace around the world. And these product lines inspired continued progress. That's the sort of ilk that is American and uniquely American. That is the sort of investment that enabled us to produce these tremendously powerful chapters in our nation's history. And it should be the inspiration. These moments should be the inspiration for us to do the correct thing today, for us to understand that we do not cut our way to prosperity. We do not cut our way to opportunity, but certainly we can invest our way to opportunity and invest our way to a new economy, a stronger outcome, an investment in our working families, an opportunity for people to truly dream the American dream. That's how we will survive. That's how we will meet the test in the present moment. The President has challenged Congress, and rightfully so. This is not a time for political gamesmanship. This is not a time for simple negative response or rejection of a political kind. This is about working as a team, executive branch with legislative branch, Republicans with Democrats, senators with House of Representatives membership. That's what we can accomplish here if we set our hearts and our minds and our souls to an agenda that is in keeping with the tradition, the deeply rooted and powerful tradition of job creation in our society. Think of it throughout our years, whether it was President Lincoln and the development of rail, or Governor DeWitt Clinton in New York with the development of an Erie Canal, or President Eisenhower and the development of an interstate system, or President Roosevelt and the Corps that went throughout this great country of ours, state by state, and built the infrastructure that really was a need for this country at a time when we were hurting from a grossly high unemployment statistic. That's America at her best, at her brightest. It's her shining moment. And the President is imploring all of us, as members, as leadership in the houses, to allow for America to have her next shining moment. Challenges and difficult times can produce the most deep and profound and uninhibited, unrestricted behavior. And we have that opportunity. We have that opportunity here to respond with this innovation economy. It takes investment. As I indicated, when I served as president and CEO of NYSERDA, and before that as energy chair for some 15 years in the New York State Assembly with the New York State Legislature, it took appropriate policy and then an investment that would enable us to respond in atraditional terms, to be able to go forward with the kinds of intellectual response to deeply rooted concerns. Think of it. We dismantled a monopoly situation for utility purposes, electric utility purposes, and chose, through an administrative order with then-Governor Pataki, to go forward with a competitive quality in our utility outreaches in New York State. A system designed for a monopoly setting then had to be adjusted to not only wheel electrons from region to region within our state, but from state to state, from state to New York State, and then from country to New York State. And so that took improvements that needed to be made in policy and in resource advocacy. I saw from my positioning in NYSERDA the benefits that came when we invested in research and development. Now, granted, all the stories, all the situations, all the scenarios within the research and development opportunities are not necessarily success stories. But without the dive into that opportunity, we will never feel the splash of success. And so many of those situations become a winning outcome. And when we have such an outcome, we're able to move forward and allow for us to even dream of the notion of enhancing our energy independence. We cannot remain so gluttonously dependent upon fossil-based fuels to be our solution for our energy crisis. We simply cannot. We cannot. We need to make certain that we commit to an innovation cycle that enables us to dream outside the ordinary, to think beyond the barrel, think outside the barrel in the case of energy reform. And those formats, those transformations, need to, again, encourage the investment in higher education, in education, because we need, as early as the pre-K setting, to encourage the development of our students, especially with the shortfall of engineers that we're producing in our society, and scientists. You know, education in itself has a need for many reforms, but one of the targeted areas of concentration needs to be the increased numbers of individuals, especially in atypical formats with young women and students of color who need to be encouraged to pursue along the pathways of engineering and science. So we begin with that investment, but then we go forward with that cultivation of ideas that begins with the investment in the intellect of America. And what I witnessed were wonderful opportunities. We had witnessed all sorts of improvements to renewables. That was part of the NYSERDA agenda. We saw all sorts of opportunities like kinetic hydropower, where we would actually be able to do turbine-type settings in an ordinary wind turbine activity, but beneath the surface of water, to use the turbulence of water to crank out energy supplies that we require. In a state like New York, it holds vast potential. It holds tremendous potential. And the R&D commitment was there. The refinements came through the Department of Energy lab, where they reviewed the product, saw where some of the weaknesses might be, engineered the assembly, the design of the turbine itself and the assembly of that turbine, designed it, redesigned it, and now We grow more and more committed to the opportunity for some of this use of turbulence of water to respond to our energy needs. That's just one small sampling in one agency in one state of how we can grow the opportunities. Investing in battery manufacturing that enables us to respond to that linchpin that is our connector to investment into the future, that enables us to, again, draw this energy independence agenda together in a way that not only grows our economy and protects our consumers and strengthens American job opportunities, but really creates a cutting-edge sort of job opportunity where, for the first time, these jobs appear on the radar so that we can begin to provide hope to individuals who may have that genius within them and who will pursue that as a career path. But it begins with individual voices in the House speaking to those issues of jobs and creation of jobs and investing in an innovation economy, investing in workers. And certainly, no one has been stronger in that attempt than my colleague, my friend from Kentucky's 3rd District. Representative John Yarmuth has been a champion on the floor. He's been a champion at home, speaking to the need for jobs in America, making it in America, which is a mantra he and I and our colleagues in the Democratic caucus have adopted. And Representative Yarmuth, it is great to have you join us for this hour. Welcome, and I know you have been such a strong voice for jobs not only for Kentucky, but for Americans from coast to coast.
Well, I thank my friend from New York. It's a great pleasure to talk about the subject that's on every American's mind, and that is how do we rebuild America, how do we put Americans back to work, and how do we recreate the kind of America that we all once admired and will admire again. And you've talked about a very incredibly important element of the job creation agenda, and that is research and development. It's clear that the jobs that we look forward to in the next generation and the generation after that are jobs that probably don't exist today. We're going to find them. We're going to discover them. And if we don't do it, they will be invented somewhere else. And that's why the initiatives that you've been talking about in the energy field are so critical. But I'd like to talk today about a job opportunity that exists right now. And the President referenced this in his speech last Thursday night, and I thought he was incredibly powerful and articulate in doing that. Because what he did was connect the dots. And when he talks about infrastructure and jobs, that's something that most Americans can understand. When we built the interstate highway system, that created an awful lot of jobs. And it also established an infrastructure that has enhanced our commercial activity throughout this country for more than half a century. And now today, we have a gap in that interstate highway system, and it happens to be in my community. Just last Friday, the bridge called the Sherman-Minton Bridge, which spans the Ohio River between Louisville, Kentucky, and New Albany, Indiana, was shut down because of structural deficiencies. So when the President speaks of infrastructure deterioration throughout the country and the thousands and thousands of bridges that need to be repaired, he didn't know at that time, the next day, one would become more than an abstract theory, it would become reality. We saw this, unfortunately, in Minnesota. We hopefully have averted a similar disaster in my community. But in the meantime, this bridge, which was built 50 years ago, which was examined just 2 years ago and judged to be structurally fine, but because of advances in analysis of certain steel products, they did a different kind of analysis this year, found cracks in the support system, and had to shut the bridge down. Now, what has this done? I-64, which begins in Virginia and runs through Lexington, Kentucky, and Louisville and on to St. Louis. It's a major, major east-west artery of this country, and this country's both civilian and commercial traffic. About 90,000 vehicles every day go across this bridge. Most of them in the morning come into Louisville. Most of them in the afternoon go out of Louisville into Indiana. Right now, all that traffic is being diverted onto I-65. We have a great centrally located community in Louisville. 3 interstates converge there, I-71, I-65, and I-64. and they all converge in a pretty similar spot, except now all that traffic that can no longer go on I-64 across the Sherman-Minton has to go across the I-65 bridge. That bridge is already taxed to its extreme. It's operating at 25% more than it was envisioned to hold. Now 90,000 more vehicles are going to be coming across that bridge every day. So we don't know yet what's going to transpire with that Sherman-Minton Bridge, whether it can be repaired, whether it's going to have to be condemned and rebuilt. But we do know that if we had been making the kinds of investments in keeping our infrastructure current and modern, and in making those investments over time, we would have had many, many thousands more people at work, and we probably would have avoided this situation. So now it's both a very serious commercial and personal inconvenience, and I don't want to go quite so far as saying it's a disaster, but a very serious problem in my community. But it also will be something that we can put lots of Americans back to work as we either fix it or replace it. And again, we're at a time now where we have example after example, thousands of these around the country. We are at a juncture where we can borrow money to do this at historically low levels, and we can put tens of thousands of Americans back to work. So as the theory, as espoused in the President's speech Thursday night, has become the reality in my community, it can become a reality of rebuilding America for all of us. And with that, I yield back to the gentleman from New York.
Representative Yarmuth, let me add to your reality with my reality. One scenario being a couple of decades old now. In 1987, a bridge collapsed along the New York State Thruway system because of flooding that came along a creek that you could walk across, perhaps in some years during the month of August. It had the CFS, the flow equal to Niagara Falls with this flooding. And it wiped out a bridge, and I believe just about all of the tragedies, all of the loss of life, which was some 10 or 11 people, were not from the area. So we're all at risk with these deficiencies to which you alluded. So it's important for us to keep up the investments. But as we speak this year, we saw some 500-year records broken with hurricanes from the ravages of the waters of Irene and the floods from the tropical storm Lee. Wiped out infrastructure galore. And so now there is a need, a demand to have these bits of infrastructure restored and rebuilt. Otherwise, the economy suffers. I saw what rail meant to jobs in my district through the course of time. I saw what the canal meant, not only for jobs in my district, but in the westward movement, the Industrial Revolution. So infrastructure is important. I dwelled on innovation economy, but you're so right to bring up the need for infrastructure and those improvements. And I thank you, Representative Yarmuth, for your thoughts. And hang with us, because this is an order where we want to talk about job creation. We're joined by yet another outspoken voice from Maryland's 3rd District. Representative John Sarbanes is an outspoken advocate for job creation in our society. He knows that from the Maryland experience, we need jobs. From the New York experience, by which I measure it all, we need jobs. Representative Sarbanes, thank you for being a leader in the House and advocating for not only Make It in America, but job creation of all types here from the House of Representatives.
I want to thank the gentleman for assembling us here today to talk about this critical issue of jobs. If you talk to the average American, the issue they put at the top of the list, and frankly, it's the issue they've had at the top of their list for months now, is the issue of jobs and creating jobs to get the economy moving again. You know, you're just talking about the infrastructure issue. And, you know, it'd be one thing if our infrastructure was in terrific shape, right? If we were at sort of 100% repair right now and everything was new and shiny. And then we had this economic crisis and we were looking around for ways to create good jobs to get ourselves back on our feet. And there wasn't these infrastructure projects out there to provide those jobs. But that's not the case. As you point out, as Congressman Yarmuth just pointed out, you can look out your window and you can see evidence of the crumbling infrastructure across the country. So Do we call that fortuitous? I don't know how you would view it, but at a time when we're trying to create jobs in this country, the fact that our infrastructure needs to be rebuilt is a tremendous opportunity for the country. And I commend the President because in his address the other night, he put rebuilding the infrastructure front and center. Not, again, just because it's a job creation effort, although that's the #1 premium that I think people are focused on, but because it has to be done. The amount of productivity this country is losing because of the waste and inefficiency of having this crumbling infrastructure is mind-boggling. So at the same time you're rebuilding the country and creating jobs that way, you're also strengthening the country so that going forward we can be more efficient, we can be more productive. But I want to extend this notion of rebuilding the country beyond just the physical infrastructure, because I think it also applies to the idea of strengthening our country in terms of human capital. We know we have to invest in human capital. I think some of us are embarrassed when we look at these comparisons with other countries around the world in terms of how our students do when it comes to math or science or other important subject areas where the United States really should be at the forefront. We should be on the cutting edge so we can be competitive, but we're not there. So what do you do about that? Well, you rebuild the country in terms of investing in human infrastructure, in human capital, and making the next generation as competitive and skilled as it can possibly be. Yesterday, I was in Baltimore. We were celebrating Adult Education and Literacy Week. There are 90 million people, according to the research, there are 90 million Americans who would benefit from literacy and, in particular, adult education opportunities. When you're in an economy where things are moving fast, where some opportunities disappear and other ones appear, you need to be able to go back through our community college system and other resources to get your skills ready to meet the new challenge. We ought to be investing in that, and I commend the President because when he came here the other night, not only did he talk about strengthening the physical infrastructure of the country, but he talked about the importance of investing in the human capital of this nation. And I think every single American out there understands the imperative of rebuilding America. That can be our mantra. And when you rebuild America, what do? You restore the American dream. The greatest frustration that people are feeling these days is they say, I worked hard, I played by the rules, but I'm not getting the opportunities to move ahead. And when you rebuild this country, you restore that American dream. You get us back to where we need to be as a nation. And that's what the American Jobs Act is intended to do. And I think that's what the agenda that the Democratic Party here in Congress is putting forward with the President. I'm glad to support that. So I thank you for pulling us together today to focus on this very, very important issue of job creation.
Well, Representative Sarbanes, I couldn't agree with you more. I have witnessed what happens when we invest in training, retraining, apprenticeship programs in pre-K through 12, in graduate school, in undergrad campuses and research centers. I witnessed the inspiration that a clean room science course provided for a young man, 30, 35 years old, unemployed, ready to leave our area, when he saw this clean room science at the local community college, which was an investment from the federal government. He did a U-turn in his stated plans. This was something that was exciting. This was something that spoke to his heart and soul. This was something he wanted to engage in. And that's the opportunity that we can give people here. The storyline of America is basic. As you say, give me that American dream. Let me unleash my skills, my talents. Let me raise a family, build a home, and dream that American dream. And we owe it to America, and people have placed their faith in this jobs agenda. I can't tell you how many times, and I know we've talked, we've heard it from our colleagues. People believe in that Make It in America opportunity. They believe in tethering that dream, that American dream, so that households, middle class, let's rebuild that middle class. Let's take those values of the middle class and make it happen. And we're happy you've joined us. And here is another partner of ours, a colleague who has led us oftentimes during special order on Making It in America, on jobs, none other than California's 10th District Representative, John Garamendi. Representative Garamendi, we often talk about the East Coast, West Coast.
Yes.
The message is unique. It's commonplace across this country. Thank you again for your leadership on the floor on job creation.
Mr. Tonko and Mr. Sarbanes, thank you for being here. I'm delighted I'm able to join you today talking about infrastructure. Earlier today, just a couple of hours ago, my office, we had representatives from the city of Davis near Sacramento and another community, Woodland, both of them in Yolo County. They came. They're talking about an infrastructure project. The water systems in those communities that for 150 years have depended upon groundwater, well, the groundwater is going bad. They need to develop a new water system, about $300, $400 million. And they cannot continue with the present system. They need help. But they also, in doing that, are going to be able to employ a vast number of people and put in place the infrastructure those communities need. We're talking about the University of California Davis campus with about 27,000 students at that campus. Bad water, they need to rebuild their water system. Right now, across America, we're looking at more than 2 million construction workers, men and women that could build that water system for those communities. They're out of work. 2 million are out of work. And the President came here on last week and said, Americans want to go back to work. They want a job. And put forward to this body, to the Senate, the House, a proposal, the American Jobs Act. The American Jobs Act, putting Americans back to work. You want to deal with the deficit? Take tax takers, people that are unemployed, and make them taxpayers. Put them to work. And we can do this and simultaneously solve the long-term deficit problem of this nation by growing the American economy once again with, as you were saying, Mr. Sarbanes, so well, infrastructure projects. You were talking about East Coast, West Coast, Mr. Tonko. 2,700 miles of American roads almost unfit for travel. This is the kind of project that the President wants, $50 billion to rebuild the American transportation system so that we can travel. Yes, Mr. Tonko.
Some of the ravages of floods in portions of our country, or the tragedies in Texas with the many fires. You know, as the President proposes this infrastructure improvement, there are those who are hurting right now who have been severely impacted by the ravages of the waters of Hurricane Irene that went so far northeast and inland that they broke centuries' worth of record keeping.
Well, Mr. Tonko, you and I were right here in the back of this House chamber earlier today, and you were sharing with me the stories, the reality in your district. These are your constituents who have been harmed, and we had our colleague Peter Welch from Vermont, who was also talking about the extraordinary damage done to the infrastructure in Vermont. As we rebuild those communities as part of this American Jobs Act, people go to work and those communities are able once again to stand on their own. Share with us some of the things that you've seen from your own district and the needs for infrastructure replacement in your communities.
Well, it's amazing because there are situations. I'll first go to Peter's district, Representative Welch's district in Vermont, where Route 4 has been wiped out. It's just about removed from the map. And what was just a couple of miles worth of activity for some people to travel to work now becomes this tremendous circuitous route that may even take you down into Massachusetts and back into eastern Vermont to get to the locations. It has made life nearly impossible. I have seen the numbers of bridges wiped out in upstate New York, a tremendous amount of bridges, locks that have been compromised in the area that I represent. I talked about hosting the Erie Canal Barge Canal activity. The locks that came in the second phase of that canal development are now tremendously devastated by the powerful force of water. Homes that have been knocked out, but the infrastructure, landslides of roads that are disappearing, and different opportunities now that are really demanding of an investment like this in order for us to go forward. And as Representative Sarbanes made mention, this is a part of the equation for success for jobs, not just jobs in the immediate zone to improve and repair and construct some of this infrastructure, but jobs in general. It is part of the equation of success. You have got to move that product line. You have got to deal with the freight issues. And so it is incumbent upon us to respond. And if politics gets in the way here, it is grossly regrettable. It's unacceptable to hold back this nation simply because you choose to do a knee-jerk political response to a plan outlined by a president who has shown a vision here that is laser sharp about what needs to be done.
You're absolutely correct. The President's American Jobs Act, which I'm embracing and I believe the Democratic Party has embraced, is one that is focused like a laser on the immediate challenge that America has, and that is employ Americans. Put Americans back to work. Another thing that's in the bill, and let me just pull this one up, this is about schools. 44% of the principals across this nation and all the schools across the nation have reported that their school, in one way or another, is not satisfactory for the students. The bathrooms are not working, the playgrounds are falling apart, the roofs are leaking. We need to make America's schools physically strong and pleasant for the students to be in. So this is a major piece of it. This also is improving the science laboratories. And the President has laid out about, I'm trying to get the, I forgot the number, I think it's about $30 billion to rebuild the American schools. It's not just the schools that are going to benefit from that, and the children that are in those classrooms and on the playgrounds, but it's the Americans that need jobs, and they'll get those jobs rehabbing and rebuilding the schools.
You know, earlier Representative Sarbanes talked to Representative Garamendi about the value of human infrastructure. It begins with sound schools that are not crumbling over the student's head, but also an investment in education. Just recently, during our August district work period, I did a tour, a number of tours in my district with manufacturing. But one story pops into mind where a manufacturer in Schoharie County, a very rural county in my district, has utilized the efforts of its CAT Center, the Center for Advanced Technology, to come up with an idea that created automation so that he can remain competitive in the global sweepstakes. But he needs people who are specifically trained and educated to run this automation aspect within his assembly process. And so it becomes very important that this human infrastructure is critical. You know, I'm reminded all the time about a century-old saga, stories of manufacturing, and decades-old stories of what we used to manufacture in America. Well, if they're doing it someplace else, the daunting challenge to America, to a sophisticated society, is build the products not yet on the radar screen. And that takes intellect, that takes genius that's cultivated in our schools and in our colleges and our universities and research centers. And then we create that product line that is brand new. But that's sophisticated society responding to a manufacturing challenge. And it begins with the human intellect. It begins with human infrastructure. And Representative Sarbanes, you're so on target with that investment of capital infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and indeed human infrastructure. So thank you for bringing that
if the gentleman
into
would
the
yield,
discussion. Yes,
I
sir.
just want to echo this idea of investing in manufacturing in this country. The economists will tell you that a manufacturing job has a greater multiplier effect on the economy than any other kind of job that you can produce. So when you're investing in manufacturing, when you're creating manufacturing jobs, when you're making it possible for Americans to make things in America, you're having the maximum impact possible on the broader economy. So it makes sense to do this. Congressman Garamendi referred to the repair and investment in our public schools across the country that the President wants to do. 35,000 public schools would benefit that have projects waiting to move forward. In other words, think about this. This is not a situation where you decide first that you're going to go out and build infrastructure, and then you got to go first do the design and the plans and everything else. I worked in Maryland for 8 years with the Baltimore City public school system, which at that time needed about $1.5 billion worth of repairs just to get back to sort of what would be an acceptable standard in terms of the physical plant of the Baltimore City school system. They know what they have to do. Those plans are complete. All the design specs are done. All they need is the resources to make it happen. They can start on those projects tomorrow. Are there workers out there to do it? You bet. There's millions of unemployed construction workers out there and others are ready to step up and fill that void. So this is something you can do right away. That's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of what's been presented to us.
Mr. Sarbanes, would you yield for
Yes.
a moment? They could start tomorrow if Congress acts today to pass the American Jobs Act, because the resources, that is the money, would be there tomorrow. The day the President signs this bill, those men and women can go to work rebuilding those schools. And there's one other thing that's in the President's bill that I'm really excited about, because we've been talking about this forever and a day around here, and that is Make It in America. There is a Buy America provision in this legislation, so when they go out and buy the paint, redo the air conditioning system, the heating and air conditioning system, those are going to be American-made paint, American-made air conditioners and heaters. That's the kind of thing we can do. We can use the American taxpayer money to rebuild the American manufacturing industry. Just as you said, we can do it. It's billions of dollars of American money in transportation, bridges, roads, buses, trains, used for American-made equipment, making it once again in America. This is exciting. This is really rebuilding the manufacturing base.
To Representative Sarbanes' point, every year that's wasted, that is allowed to pass by youngsters in the 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, whatever, will never have the experience they ought to. So we're letting down the workers of tomorrow by this delay, by this resistance, this recalcitrance of a political order that is unacceptable. Now, I'll just make the point that Wynn Kintz, who is the owner of the facility that I toured in Schoharie County, said that he reaches the community colleges routinely because he needs that upgraded skill set. There are manufacturing jobs across this country for which they need skilled labor. And if we walk away from that investment in human infrastructure, we've denied progress for this country. We've been joined by an outspoken advocate for jobs, and I mean a very loud voice because we've heard the volume cranked up. It's the chair of our Democratic caucus and the representative of Connecticut's 1st congressional district, and that is none other than Representative John Larson. Representative Larson, thank you for joining us in this special order.
Well, I'm honored to join the gentleman from New York, the gentleman from California, and the gentleman from Maryland. Martin Luther King once described the need to act as the fierce urgency of now. Nothing is more important to the American people. Nothing is more important to anyone listening to this broadcast than seeing this country go back to work. Representative Garamendi talked very eloquently about Make It in America. People want to see jobs created in this country and want to see Americans back to work, because we all know that when we put America back to work by making things here in America, that it provides the opportunity for every American to succeed. The President has called upon Congress to act. He did so in a speech last week We need to respond now. He did so in bipartisan fashion, citing bills that have come from both sides of the aisle. Congress as an institution should be about the vitality of ideas that you heard expressed here this evening, but then turned into a plan of action that sees us lowering our unemployment rate. It is simply unacceptable that Congress would dawdle while 14 million Americans are unemployed and a sum total of 25 million Americans are underemployed. The time schedule that Congress has here should be expanded so that we're working every day to see that Americans are put back to work. 14 million Americans are crying out for the President's proposal to be enacted, to see this body take action. They are tired of the endless bickering between both sides and want to see action taking place in this body. My colleagues have outlined very specific proposals that will achieve those goals. We've just witnessed one of our colleagues who spoke so eloquently, and I'm referring to Mr. Tonko from New York State, about what has happened to his community, his district, the very character of which was changed because of a calamity. More than a 500-year level storm that ravaged the states of Connecticut, New York, and Vermont, and left people not only destitute in terms of their very homes and their livelihood, but again seeking what is fundamental to this country, a certain sense of fairness and shared sacrifice and commitment to helping out fellow Americans. What better way than rebuilding our country and starting with those communities that have been ravaged? The youth that could be employed immediately in our urban and rural areas. The rebuilding, as Mr. Garamendi has said, of roads and bridges and sewage systems and fire departments and public schools with broadband to light up the desktops of our children and the blackboards or whiteboards, if you will, of our teachers so that we can once again assume our rightful position as the preeminent economic leader in this global economy. We have Professor and Dr. Joseph Stiglitz speak before the caucus today. And he said it very clearly, that job creation equals deficit reduction. We are not talking across the aisle here. We need to come together as Americans. We witnessed this past weekend what can happen when America decides to be unified in common cause, as we did and as we responded after the events of September the 11th. We need to respond to the crisis at hand, which is 14 million Americans that are unemployed, the devastation that it has wreaked on our economy, what it's meant to our housing, what it's meant to our education system, what it's meant to our manufacturing base that Mr. Garamendi has talked about time and again on this floor. That's what we have to do, is reinvest in Americans. And in doing so, as Dr. Stiglitz, the preeminent economist in this country, has indicated, we can both reduce our deficit by more than 25% and put America back to work. What we need is action from this Congress, from this House of Representatives. Bring the President's bill to the floor. If you won't bring the President's bill to the floor, then engage the Select Committee that has a very specific time frame with deadlines and dates, and no cloture votes in the Senate, no poison pill amendments in the House, an up or down vote on jobs. That's what the American people are demanding. That's what you gentlemen have so eloquently put forward here.
Chairman Larson, we have precious few minutes left. I'll make a few comments and then yield to my gentlemen colleagues. as we close this special order hour. To me, you know, you've identified it well. This country has had, throughout its history, its shining moments. This is our opportunity to invest in America's next shining moment. It will take commitment by the legislators here on the Hill in Washington and encouraging and inspiring and building a tone that brings us together to think as one as a nation, generation to generation to generation, region of the country to region of the country, political persuasion to opposite political persuasion, philosophy of difference to the philosophy of another kind, moving together, coming together, understanding this is our defining moment. It's our moment to create our next shining example of America at her best. Representative Sarbanes, thank you for joining us.
Thank you again, Congressman Tonko, for pulling us together this afternoon. I just want to make a couple of points. Echoing what Congressman Larson said, if you look at just what happened over the last couple of weeks in terms of the disaster that hit the eastern seaboard, and you can look over the last few months across this country and see those sort of disaster effects happening to people. Nobody would question that the federal government has an important role to play in coming to the assistance of people that are in that dire situation. Whatever your larger philosophy is about whether government should be large or small and so forth, everyone agrees that government should be on the side of people that are facing such a desperate situation and should act quickly. So if we accept that proposition, we also ought to think about the 14 million people, John, that you referred to, who basically are facing an economic hurricane every single day. And it is the role, the appropriate role, the necessary role of the federal government taking those taxpayer dollars and saying we're going to turn and help our fellow citizens in need, and we're going to do it quickly, and we're going to do it in a way that not only helps them but is also good for the broader economy and will put people back to work. And let me just finish with this last thought. I hope people watch this discussion, and I hope people keep track of who's going to be supportive of the American Jobs Act and who's not. Because there are going to be people in this chamber who vote against it and drag their feet. And the reason I want people to pay attention is because people are getting cynical out there. And I hope that it will cure some of their cynicism to see that there are folks, yes, here in Washington, who are absolutely determined to try to come to the assistance of people that are looking for a good job opportunity out there. So pay attention, because there are people here who want to do the right thing, and hopefully that will stop you from becoming so cynical. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much to Chairman Larson, and then Representative Garamendi to close. Chairman Larson.
Well, thank you again, Paul, for organizing this special order. And I think John Sarbanes said it well. The gentleman from Maryland spoke eloquently about the need for us to act and the need for us to act now. It has been a storm. It has been a hurricane for the 14 million people that are unemployed and for their families. And all Americans are asking is the simple dignity that comes from being able to look across the table at your spouse and your family and let them know that they are safe and secure because you have a job and you are providing for them. Thank you.
You're welcome. Representative Garamendi to close.
Mr. Tonko, thank you for bringing us together. Yesterday, the President delivered to this chamber a comprehensive American Jobs Act. Employment for perhaps 2, maybe more than 2 million Americans, immediately available as soon as this Congress acts. And it is fully paid for. Will not add to the deficit. It is fully paid for through a series of tax increases on the super wealthy and the oil companies finally having to give up our tax money that they've enjoyed for more than a century as a subsidy. We can do this. We must do this. We must put America back to work. And in doing so, we will be able to deal with the deficit because Americans have become, once again, taxpayers, and we have created the critical investments in individuals, in education, in infrastructure, and in small businesses, all of whom will benefit from the American Jobs Act. It's our responsibility. It is our opportunity. It is America's opportunity to go back to work. Mr. Tonko, thank you for bringing us together, and with that I yield.
It's been my pleasure and honor to work with you, gentlemen, and with that, Mr. Speaker, we yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a tough time in our American history. I was a history major at Texas A&M. I knew I owed the Army 4 years from a scholarship I had. I had been really inspired by American history in high school by Sam Parker, my teacher, my scoutmaster. And so I know a little bit about our history. I know a lot about world history as well. And it's important to take things in perspective, especially speeches here in Washington, and take them from the perspective of how it all fits together. Now, we have been in this chamber, and I was sitting right back there on the aisle, and we had the President of the United States standing right there. I was on a direct line of sight, eye to eye with the President, except his eyes cut right into the teleprompter each time he looked my way. So I don't think we ever made eye contact. But he kept telling us over and over, 16, 17 times, I didn't count them, I've been told, but he said, we got to pass this bill right now, this bill right now. Well, unfortunately, last Thursday when the President was saying we've got to pass this bill right now, there was no bill. There was no plan. He talked about his plan. He talked about his bill. They didn't have it quite ready yesterday until later, and we kept harassing the White House saying we want to get a copy of the bill. We need a copy of the bill. You've said pass the bill now. Do we not get to even have a copy of the bill before we have to pass it, or would it be okay if we could, see it before we pass it? It might be a good idea to file it at some point if we're going to pass a bill. So it's just my thinking. And so the White House was kind enough late yesterday to email a copy of the bill. We got it up on our website at gohmert.house.gov. For others who are intrigued by the promises that have been made and what it actually does, let's see, it's called Saving Obama's Job, no, I'm sorry, American Jobs Bill is the name of it. It's interesting to hear somebody talk about their bill and then get it and dig through. I think I finished about 5 this morning, going through all 155 pages of the bill. And it's most interesting. Some of these things I'm going to have to talk to people who have more expertise in particular areas. Some things it's pretty obvious what they say. Page 6, he gets right into payroll tax relief. And again, as the person who came up with the idea for a tax holiday as a way to stimulate the economy back nearly 3 years ago, and as a person who in January of 2009 told the President personally about my idea for a tax holiday. Moody's rated a tax holiday as increasing the GDP, looked like more than other stimulus proposals. That was back in 2009, before this President squandered $4.5 trillion above and beyond the amount, around $2.2 trillion or so a year, that was coming in. Shocking that we could go through that much money. Of course, we had 2 years, the first 2 years, with the same party in power in the House and Senate as was in the White House, as is in the White House. And as I found my first term in 05 and 06, sometimes when you have the same party in the White House and in the House and Senate, if the people in Congress are not adequately restrained and cannot adequately restrain themselves, there ends up being a big spending frenzy. And in 2006, there again, my second year in Congress, we spent over $160 billion more than we took in. Democrats across the aisle rightfully tore after Republicans. How could you spend $160 billion more than what we had coming into the Treasury? And they were right to do so. We should not have spent $160 billion more than we had coming in. Ironically, the President Bush in 2008 had a bill passed by the Democratic-controlled House and Senate, a stimulus bill that opened the door a bit to these stimulus frenzies. And $40 billion of that, $160 billion, as I recall, was going to be going to people who didn't pay any taxes, income taxes, as a rebate, which caused me to ask the President down there on the floor after the State of the Union, how do you give a rebate to people that didn't put any bait in? But then after that, we had TARP, and President George W. Bush is a good man. He is smarter than most of the people in this town wanted to give him credit, one of the wittiest people you'll ever be around. But he made the mistake of listening to, until now, the worst Treasury Secretary in the history of the country, Hank Paulson. And Paulson says, look, give me $700 billion, I can fix things. Well, that was a mistake. Anybody that read that bill would understand that was not a bill that should have ever passed. And if more people on the House floor had read the bill, I am confident, I know they couldn't have brought themselves to vote for it, but they didn't read it. Many didn't. Well, that's why I spent most of last night going through the President's jobs bill. He does have some payroll tax relief, but compared to the payroll tax relief I was proposing, we were told it would be close to, if you just gave people all of their tax money in their check, it didn't need to come back from Washington, it would be in the check. If we passed it and the President had signed it on a Thursday, it had been in their Friday check. All of the money, all of the taxes they paid. And that would have stimulated the economy more than, and we wouldn't have needed the government to say, hey, let's bail out GM and let's bail out Chrysler, because if people had had their own money, they could have gone down and bought a car from the car manufacturer and dealer that they wanted to buy from, instead of just throwing money at the car industry. And I appreciated the GM commercial saying we paid our money back. Unfortunately, that was not true. It was a misrepresentation. Still money owed. But anyway, I guess he would do well in Washington with that kind of mentality. But the payroll tax provided, the relief provided here is just a fraction of what I was suggesting in late 2008, 2009. And the President, in fact, when I told him the idea in January 2009, said, that's a great idea. Have you talked to Larry? Talking about Larry Summers, who was right behind him at the time. I said, I'd love to talk to Larry Summers about it. Summers reached around, gave me a card, says, give me a call. He never took my calls. I waited a week, and then he didn't call me. I felt hurt, you know, like high school days when you're trying to ask somebody on a date and they say, let me get back to you. Well, I was snubbed. He didn't get back to me. Okay, well, not first time, so I relentlessly called and kept getting, I was given eventually to some young man who sounded like his voice was still changing, but anyway, telling me to leave a message, and I didn't leave messages. And Larry, as the President referred to him, never got back to me, and I understand he's not over there now. But they called a tax holiday back in those days that got just a few bucks in people's pocket. Nothing like the stimulus would have been if people had been able to keep their own money, all of it, for a couple of months. Now, this wasn't my motive. My motive was to stimulate, but there was a secondary occurrence that would have happened had we had a real tax holiday, even for 2 or 3 months. It would have been that workers across America, including union workers, would notice, many of them for the first time, it would really come home how much money they're sending to Washington every month, and how much better their lives would be if they didn't send that much money to Washington every month, if they had their own money to give to their own charitable causes, they had their own money to bail themselves out, their own money to stimulate their own household. Everybody had been better off. But that's not the tack the President chose. He got what was originally touted to be an $800 billion stimulus, and he also had about $450 billion of the original TARP that he and Secretary Geithner were able to find ways to squander. And anyway, we were told if we did not pass the President's stimulus package back in early '09, he said the unemployment rate, Mr. Speaker, might go as high as 8.5%. That 8.5% sounds pretty good. People remember him saying, well, gee, if you'll pass this, unemployment will be around 8% at the worst. Wrong. But if you don't pass it, it could go as high as 8.5%. I'd take that 8.5% right now and have everybody that got that money give it back, because it was, for the most part, wasted. Now, people back then were told by the President, it's a stimulus bill. It's all about infrastructure. We're going to have this money go to infrastructure. Well, there was only a tiny pittance of what may have been more like $1 trillion that went to infrastructure. But anyway, that goes through page 16 with that part. And we get into first responder stabilization, and there is $5 billion for one program, $4 billion for another program, $1 billion for the Attorney General First Responder Stabilization Fund. Oh, I guess $4 billion for the Attorney General to carry out competitive grant program. It keeps being lost on people here that America's better off if you don't force people at the point of imprisonment and IRS persecution to give all this money to Washington, and then we'll dole it out as we see fit. The economy does better when you let people keep their own money and only bring just as much as necessary. Don't try to run everybody's lives. But at page 17, we're going to give all this money to the Attorney General's office and let them dole it out as they see fit. And we've seen that it usually goes, if you're a friend of the administration, you're going to do well. If you're not, they're going to sick on you all of the power of the bureaucratic, whether it's EPA, all of these administration's tools, and you'll pay a price. We're finding that out in Texas. Now, you go to the next, page 18, you've got elementary and secondary schools. They're supposed to get money. But, of course, it's going to come through Washington because we know best. And we're going to dole some money to the states. We're going to dole some to state and local applications, as indicated on page 19. But you can't miss this. It's throughout the bill. Page 20, here we go again. We saw it with the Solyndra fiasco in California. This administration giving away $500 million that can't be accounted for now, just squandered. Well, we're going to do that some more. Maybe if we keep throwing money at a bad idea, it'll somehow, someday, some way get a little better. So page 20's got us prioritizing green practices kind of like a bankrupt Spain has done. And now, there's money in here, page 21, and this is nice because money even for private schools, but only if they have a child poverty rate of at least 40%. So then we go, you got community college modernization and more green jobs within the colleges, page 23. And you go on and on as I went through this. It does go on and on. But then we're told, you know, we are going to invest. This time we really, really mean it. We said we really meant it back in January of '09 that we're going to have infrastructure and that's going to bring us out. We said it. We didn't spend it on infrastructure. We squandered it, Acorn, all these different groups. But this time we really, really, really mean it. And so let's see. That looks like that's okay, $2 billion for that program and on. And it's interesting. We got all this money we're going to put toward highways and whatnot. Now, anyone, Mr. Speaker, that believed this was all going to go straight to infrastructure missed the point. Because then we get over to page 40 and you get to the real jobs. Now, this is where the jobs are really created. Start it in page 40. It's called the American Infrastructure Financing Authority. If you love Fannie and Freddie, you're going to love the American Infrastructure Financing Authority. And let's see, page 41, you find out 7 voting members appointed by the President. Well, he's good at creating jobs. Look at all the government jobs he's added. So that's who I want having appointed. I mean, he's appointed all these people from universities that have never created jobs in their lives, and so they're perplexed why their programs aren't working. He does have the head of GE that's helping him with that jobs program, and China is grateful. China's very grateful to the head of GE because he's created lots of jobs. They're just in China and not here. But maybe he'll get to be on this board as well. But it's another government program, and let's see, I want to make sure I get this right. Let's see, the board of directors first appointed shall be deemed the incorporator of AIFA. That's American Infrastructure Financing Authority. But that'll make for some good reading. I wouldn't read it right before going to bed because you might not be able to go to sleep. Then we get over to page 56, and this talks about the funding of the American Infrastructure Financing Authority and the administrative fees. That's section 257. And we get into, let's see, hereby appropriated AIFA to carry out this act for the cost of direct loans and loan guarantees, subject to limitations under section 253, and for administrative costs, $10 billion, and remain available till expended. And then you got some other monies there, but that's good news because, you know, you can spend that for administrative costs. And fortunately, in Washington, we don't run up much in the way of administrative costs. Now, one thing that some people have talked about to raise a little bit of revenue is to sell some of our broadband spectrum. And then we also know that there are those in Washington who are not happy that the FCC has not been able to have a fairness doctrine so they can dictate what goes on the air. Well, not to worry, because people, it seems, are going more and more to broadband than the radio waves and television waves. We're getting more and more broadband stuff, so we have the answer to the lack of a fairness doctrine that the FCC has wanted to under this administration, but we've been able to avoid it so far. There's nothing about a fairness doctrine in here, but fortunately, you get to page 75, you find out we're going to establish, I love this name, Public Safety Broadband Corporation. Next page, 76, you find out it's established a private nonprofit corporation, and you're going to have some members who know how to run a government operation and create government jobs. Of course, it killed jobs in the private sector, but creating government jobs. And that's down here. You've got the Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Homeland Security, Attorney General, We're talking real job creators here, and others who will be on that board, so people can feel better about that. If you don't think we have enough government control of things, well, this bill, you're going to love it. More government control, more government corporations, because the thing that many missed, and it jumped out at me as I sat back there and the President spoke, when he says, we want to work side by side with business. For people who have ears and hear, that means this President wants to be your business partner. Well, that scares some folks. And that's why I think you saw the market go down the next day. People who understand how real jobs in the real world are created know that the government being partners with people trying to generate jobs is a job killer. We don't need a government to be partners side by side working with business. The government, as designed by the founders and as we're supposed to be carrying out, is supposed to be a referee to make sure people play fair. And if the government had made sure people were playing fair instead of dictating every detail of their existence, then they would have noticed that Bernie Madoff was cheating people. But the government, you know, our bureaucracy was too concerned with dictating how people live, what they forgot about their job as referee. And I've highlighted so much stuff as I went through this through the night. I won't bore you with all of this, Mr. Speaker. Let's see, public safety, roaming, priority access. FCC is going to get to report on the efficient use of public safety spectrum. There's all kinds of, extension of extended benefit provisions. Good stuff there. Now, I've been a fan of retraining people when there are jobs in one sector and people have lost jobs in another and there are no jobs with the training they have. That's a good idea. It's better money than just throwing out unemployment reimbursement if you can train people to have a real job. This bill spends billions of dollars. We've got the Reemployment Now program. That's a new federal bureaucracy, a new federal program. We got the state plan at page 98. We got the Bridge to Work program at 99. We're going to retrain people for jobs. We don't have jobs that they can fill, but we're going to spend a lot of time training them for jobs that don't exist. Wouldn't we be better off encouraging the real job creators, the small business folks, into creating jobs and then train them for that? But no, we're going to suck more capital out of the financial community into the government so we can train people, retrain people for jobs that don't exist. Now, then we have the page 106, the short-time compensation program, and its purposes means short-term compensation program means a program under which participation of employers, voluntary, and employer reduces the number of hours worked by employees in lieu of layoffs. Such employees whose work weeks have been reduced by at least 10% are then eligible for unemployment compensation. You lose 10% of your work time, guess what? We're now opening up a new avenue for unemployment compensation. 10% is all it takes of the reduced. Employers, I've talked to so many saying, I'm asking my employees, I don't want to fire anybody. I'm asking them to hang on. We're all reducing what we're taking in, and we're going to try to get through this without firing anybody. But, you know, everybody's had to take a cut. Well, this will make them eligible for unemployment compensation, which raises their unemployment insurance rates they have to pay, which means they're going to have to lay off somebody in order to pay the additional unemployment insurance rates. Of course, then you've got temporary financing of short-term compensation agreements at page 109. We got grants, we've got all kinds of subsidized employment for unemployment low-income adults. You know, instead of sucking all this capital out of the private sector, it seemed like we would want to help create more jobs. Well, if you're not satisfied with all the jobs that are created by the new government programs, new government agencies, wonderful that we've got something better than Fannie and Freddie for infrastructure financing. That's great. But I understand that lawsuit filing is down significantly around the country. Our Constitution tells you, and we know in our hearts, that it's wrong to discriminate against people based on race, creed, color, national origin, gender. Those things make sense. We shouldn't discriminate. And those are protected classes. We've also added, no matter what your sexual preference, your sexual orientation, no matter what you're oriented toward sexually, because the Democratic majority would not allow us to define sexual orientation to exclude illegal activity. We know sexual orientation is a protected class now. We're adding in this bill a new protected class called unemployed. Title on page 129, Prohibition of Discrimination in Employment of the Basis of an Individual's Status as Unemployed. And it says right here in the findings that we find that denial of employment opportunities to individuals because of their status as unemployed is discriminatory and burdens commerce. So it goes on and explains this in preceding pages. So the good news is, if you're unemployed and you go to apply for a job and you're not hired for that job, see a lawyer. You may be able to file a claim because you got discriminated against because you were unemployed. Now, some would point out legitimately that will discourage people from doing interviews of people unemployed, because if they do, they've got a claim, or may have a claim to make against the employer for discrimination based on the fact that they were unemployed. So I think this will help trial lawyers who are not having enough work, because it can open the door. You know, we heard from our friends across the aisle in the preceding hour, 14 million people out of work. That's 14 million potential new clients that could go hire a lawyer and file a claim because they didn't get hired even though they were unemployed. And we've heard the president demonizing billionaires and millionaires, and, you know, why are the Republicans so strong on trying to bail out their rich friends? Well, what we've learned here in this town in recent years is that if the very wealthy don't mind being called names, they will be enriched and even engorged. For example, we know that Wall Street executives have been called fat cats by this administration and demonized, yet the little secret behind the scenes joke is, don't mind being called names, this administration has brought more profit to Wall Street than Goldman Sachs has ever seen in their history. So, and Wall Street executives and their families gave to President Obama 4-1 over John McCain. So, of course, they got a good little deal going there. And also demonize oil and gas industry, even though, you know, you love British Petroleum because they were going to endorse the cap and trade bill. And you demonize them, and then you stick provisions in this bill that have no effect on the big major oil companies. They will only affect, these provisions at the back at page 151, 2, and 3, they will not affect the big majors like British Petroleum, except that because they will destroy the ability of independent producers that produce much or maybe most of the oil and gas in the continental U.S., it'll drive them out of business. It will dry up investment. There's a restriction on, this is repeal of the oil and gas working interest exception to passive activity. So there's things in here that's going to dry up the independent oil company's ability to function. And the pay for, we were told over and over, this is all paid for, is on page 155. Here it is. Get ready. The Budget Control Act of 2011 is amended by striking $1.5 trillion that the Super Committee is going to have to find in cuts and inserting $1.95 trillion. So this paid for, he said, it's all paid for, it's all paid for, and the way it's all paid for is the new Super Committee is now ordered under the President's bill to find another $450 billion to pay for his bill. So it's all paid for. Hallelujah. Amen. Now, there are so many more problems I haven't had a chance to get to, and there are some things that I probably missed even as I went through this. But there is such bad news for America in here. Union workers, watch out. This may be the end of your jobs. But it's okay because the unions are growing by getting more government employees, not the hard-working folks in the regular unions. These are the government unions. It should say, instead of America's job bill, saving the President's job bill, but this is a disaster for every other thinking person in America. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas.